Hey, good morning guys. Welcome to another day. One of the things I heard about in the news yesterday, a lot of people talking about what are the schools going to reopen? Are they going to reopen soon? Are they going to reopen earlier than you're expecting? Is your summer going to end early? That's actually something people are talking about. Governor Gavin Newsom was talking about steps to start reopening California, and there'll be a four-stage process, and the second stage of that would be reopening the schools. And he's hoping maybe to reopen them as early as July, which means that we would have a shorter summer, although in some ways if we're on summer, it's very strange. But then also, we would have a longer school year. These would be additional weeks of the school year instead of being shorter, just a shorter summer and getting out early. But there's a lot of questions we got to figure out. So what would that look like? Well, definitely be a longer school year. We would probably have at least some online component, something like what we're doing now as part of that. Maybe you're only going to school part of the day and then you spend the rest of the time at home working on stuff online. What we're still working for is some level of social distancing, so that whatever infection rates that may be still out there are still on the downhill, and instead of having a resurge, a rebump of the infection rate. And then social distancing while you're at schools. I don't know what they're going to. I definitely probably scaling back on no assemblies, no rallies, but at the same time, are you going to space the kids apart and have them 6 feet apart in the classroom? You guys have seen our classrooms. We've got 37 kids in the classroom, and there's about enough room to have 18 inches between desks. It's not very socially distanced at all. So let's think about that. Also, how are we going to pay for things, and what changes need to be made before kids come back to school? Like, who's going to work the extra hours in the classroom? If the teachers that you normally have are only contracted to work from August through May, then who's going to work those extra hours? Are you going to hire different teachers, or are you going to spread out the hours of the teachers along the way and have an extra hiring of extra people? And then what physical changes need to happen? Do you need to build new classrooms? Do you need to open up a new school? Do you need to open up extra facilities so that the kids can have 6 feet apart when they're in the classroom? So those are things that the governor is thinking about, we're thinking about, and I want to know what you're thinking about. I'll post a question. I want to hear what you think would be good ideas for what changes could happen to schools when we come back to school. And right now it's an opportunity because we're getting a bit of a reboot, a bit of a chance to start over with some new policies as we come back to school, and if we're going to make big changes, now is a good time. And that's a lot like what we're talking about with Reconstruction. Reconstruction at the end of the Civil War was an opportunity for a reboot, opportunity to bring the South back, but how? How are we going to bring it back, and how are we going to bring it back in a way that is good for the long term and is going to be good for what we want for our country? So we've been talking about Reconstruction plans. We talked about Lincoln's 10% plan. We talked about the Wade Davis bill. That was kind of a variation on the 10% plan, but it had some different features. And then we talked about Andrew Johnson's plan. So today we're going to talk about the Radical Republicans' plan. And the Radical Republicans, this was the part of the Republican Party that were interested in the most change. Think about them as the ones who wanted the most freedoms for African Americans, and they wanted the most change to what the Southern culture, the Southern economy, the Southern laws had been doing. So they were really pushing for the biggest change, which has its ups and downs. Right? We were fighting a war to enact change, and the Radical Republicans were really concerned that there wasn't going to be enough change. If we do Reconstruction with minimal change, then we might as well have just not fought the war. So they are motivated. Think about their motivation. What are they going for? They're motivated by three factors. Number one is revenge. They're a little bit angry about having to fight a war over slavery, over the wrongs of the South, over having to spend 620,000 lives were lost in this war, and it was an expensive war, and we're still paying off debts for that years into Reconstruction. So why would we want to just let the South go without any type of punishment? And then there's the freedmen. The freedmen are the people who were slaves that are now free. So we call them freedmen. And they're going to need some help. They're going to need maybe some financial assistance, maybe some education, maybe something to ensure that their rights are taken care of and they aren't just acting like slaves that are walking the street. They are actually going to be freed men. And then finally, political power. The political power of the South is something that the radical Republicans were concerned about, because historically, the political power of the South was in Democratic hands, and the Democrats were controlling it, and the Democrats were pro-slavery, and the Democrats were cotton farming elites, planter class, and they would probably suddenly have a resurgence in their political power once they come back into the Union. During the years of the Civil War, they were largely unrepresented in Congress. So if suddenly you give the states back, the southern states back, their rights as political entities, and they start sending representatives to Congress, and you start counting the African Americans as full citizens, not the 3/5 compromise that only counts them as partial citizens, suddenly the South has a lot of political power, and the radical Republicans wanted to make sure that power was in check and wouldn't be used for the wrong reasons. So, the revenge. Let's talk about the revenge. A desire among some to punish the South for causing the war so they wouldn't rebel again. Maybe they would take away some plantation land away from those planters and divide it up among the freemen. Concern for the freedmen. Some believe that the federal government had a role to play in the transition of those freedmen from slavery to freedom. Are we just going to let them go on their own, or is the federal government, the duty of a government, and this is where we think about the duty of government, is it just simply to protect you in times of war, or is it something to enable you in times of peace to become the most prosperous people that you can be? In this case, the freedmen were going to need some help with that. And then, like I said, the political power concerns. Radicals wanted to keep the Republican Party in power in both the North and the South, take away power from the Southern leaders, and the radical Republicans really wanted to just put leaders in place in the South, make sure that the leaders that were in power in the South were ones that were going to be friendly to Northern causes, they were going to be friendly to the goals of the Civil War. The radical Republicans' plan. This is the plan. Let's start with money. There's different aspects to the plan. The first plan, talking about money, is protective tariffs. Now, tariffs are a tax on something that's either imported or exported. In this case, it was things that were being imported. This is something that means that, say we import something from China and we put a tariff on it. So that makes a 10-cent pencil that we imported from China turn into maybe a 20-cent pencil. It costs a little bit more because the Chinese have to pay a tax on anything that they import into the country. So it costs them more, so they pass that expense on to us. That is good for American manufacturers because then they don't have to compete at the same level. So anything that came in from out of the country is going to cost a little bit more, so maybe you're more likely to buy from an American manufacturer. The problem here is that the South was not manufacturing a lot of things. They were importing things, and they didn't have an alternate place to get some of their things. So it really protected the northern industries and would not really do a lot of help for the South. But that's something the Republicans wanted to put in place. The pro-business national banking system. They definitely wanted to have a national banking system in place that was going to loan money and encourage the growth of business. Looking toward westward expansion, we're going to start getting into settling the West and moving westward, and we'll talk about the Homestead Act and people moving all the way to the West Coast and filling out the land in between. They wanted to have a liberal policy for land for those settlers, along the lines of something to encourage people to go out there and get more land and get out there and start developing it. And then also federal aid for railroad development. So give those railroads some money too, so that they can build more railroads to connect the East Coast and the West Coast and build that transcontinental railroad. And then talking about the African Americans, the freedmen. This is what was going to happen for them, according to the radical Republican plan. Going to make sure that they have equal rights to help them begin their new lives. Going to give them access to schools, to land, to the right to vote, and then full citizenship, being recognized not just as a free person, but a free person with full citizenship. How is this going to happen? Well, the radical Republicans planned that the South would be divided up into military zones governed by martial law. You'll have soldiers there making sure that the people in the South are following the rules set forth by the radical Republicans. Now, is this the best solution? Remember, we're evaluating all of our possibilities, and I want you to think about what are your goals and what are your obstacles. Our goals: we want to reunite the country, we want to rebuild, we want to heal. How are we going to make that happen? Obstacles in the way: we have the legacy of slavery, we have the question of punishment and prevention, and then finally, how to rebuild this broken world. This is something I really need you guys to absorb. I know we're spending like nearly the whole week just on plans for Reconstruction, and obviously not all of these plans were put into place. But again, these are questions that we deal with even in 2020. These are questions that we will continue to deal with until people figure out the best way to go about these. Because whenever we have a war, whenever we have a conflict, whenever we have a government that has crumbled that needs to be rebuilt, we have these questions of how do you rebuild, how do you make the changes lasting, and how do you make them fair, and how do you make them in the best interest of all. So evaluate this. Go ahead and write down your thoughts. You guys should be getting close to the end of your Reconstruction plans packet, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. Log into Schoology, make sure you get your attendance taken, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow about what actually happened and some of the beginnings of the impact of Reconstruction and how that affected the South on into the 1960s and up to today. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.